We're here at Wheeler's Motorcycle Shop at Tail of the Dragon, and today we're going to tackle changing the tires out on this Metacycle. This one might be a little different from yours. I don't have the tabbed spokes on the wheels, so I've got an inner tube to deal with, but otherwise the process is about the same. We got to take these two bolts out of the top of this cover, and then it lifts up and comes out where we can get to the battery and the connectors to undo this cable so that we can take the rear motor out. So let's get started. There's 3 plugs to remove here in this order. 1, 2, 3. So you unplug them. So these 2 screws on each side of the battery have to come out as well, and then the battery slides out. There's a couple tabs here that just hold down the back of this cover. Follow the lead for this down and unplug it on this cover down here. That'll be the next step. Removing the 4 bolts underneath the frame. The blue, the green, and the yellow are the ones that go back to the electric motor. The screws are pretty tight for a Phillips, so we use the 10mm socket here. All right, and this little cable right here that powers the lighting on the license plate and everything, it runs in and it's just connected right there. So we're just gonna pop this off, and it's this connector. Where was that at? Was that in the front? It was right there.
You gotta get this one
disconnected, and this one. So both those in the front. Oh yeah, it's already plugged. Okay, so that's not a disconnected thing, it's just a pulling out thing. Okay, so we're gonna start snaking this through this hole here. Bike. So in total, there's those 3 main cables, and then these 2. One is actually just blocked off, so you don't have to unplug it from anything. And now we're ready to remove the rear wheel. Take note of how much force it takes to break them loose. There's probably a torque spec somewhere, but we haven't gotten it from Sondors, so we're just going to wing it here. Okay, so this metal piece right here, just have to keep wiggling it back and forth. It's kind of snug, but it eventually walks its way off that bolt. Okay, so unlike a normal bike, you don't pull the axle out the side. This whole assembly slides out the back because the motor has to have something to put torque against to create propulsion. So you gotta take out these 2 bolts right here. So you gotta break the bolts loose on both sides to get the axle loose enough to slide out the back. Metal plate's probably going to be like the other side, where you just got to wiggle on it until it comes out, but it's... There we go. Alright, so one thing to keep in mind if you're used to changing regular motorcycle tires is this is quite heavy, so you have to pick up quite a bit to get it to slide in that slot and come out. It's going to feel like it's hanging, but it's just because this weighs like 100 pounds assembly or whatever.
Just take...
Yeah, and take note there's a collar. So to get that core out of that valve, we used a valve cap that has a... Now the axle is protruding, may cause a problem on some tire machines, but they cleared this one okay. So we gotta, and like I said, this one not having the tabs on the edge of the wheel where the spokes go to means we've got to deal with the inner tube. And the inner tube that we took out, you can see where it was pinched in several places. Now he's reusing the rubber strip that came out with the stock inner tube that was in there to go back in there and sort of give a little cushion against the spoke ends. A little baby powder in there to let things slide around and install a little bit cleaner. A little bit of tire lube on the beads to let it seat properly and not end up with a high point like some of the people have been reporting on the bikes they've been getting from the factory. So do a little pre-inflation of the tube in there so that it takes out any of those wrinkles. Yeah, forgot how heavy that is. Throw your back out. All right, with the tire mounted back up, we're ready to slide this back in. Now, of course, this flat side of this axle needs to slide into and match this slot right here. So it might be handy to have a second person to help kind of lift it up while another person slides that in, because you can't roll it in like a normal bike. So I'm going to help them out here. Okay, now with no chain adjustment or length adjustment like a normal axle goes, you just slide this all the way forward, and then the little metal plate sort of locates the axle and a specific distance and everything. Okay, so we've got the 3 thick wires fed in here, and they're starting to come out the bottom. We're going to feed these 2 blocks, these 2 connectors through here. Running these 3-phase wires back to the controller for the motor is a little bit tricky. They fight you and don't want to cross thread those bolts that holds them in place. They're color coded, so you can see that there's like blue on the connection for the blue wire, but they run down underneath this orange conduit and then hop over it to connect. So they want to lay like right in here when you get done. It's a little tricky to get them all in place. Okay, so we just realized that there's like a top and a bottom to each one of these tabs, and so you want the tab to be oriented so that the thick part is downwards and the tab is kind of at the top. So this one needs to go on flipped over like that, upside down. That's the way it should go. Okay, this part's proven really tricky, getting this heat sink back up on there. Everything's super tight and kind of pushing back down against it. So just take your time with this and be ready to fiddle with it a little bit here. All right, so that was quite a workout getting this thing back up in there and lined. I would highly advise that you take very careful notes about the routing of those 3 thick cables on this side of this heatsink. Played havoc in getting this back up in there and fighting us. So one of the things that we noticed was that we have too much length in this cable now. It's sticking up too high and the cover won't go on it if I try to put it on. So there was more of a loop down here of this cable. We're going to put some more length into this cable in this direction, and that way it'll pull it out of the top up there a little bit better. We just realized we forgot to put this cover over those cables. So yeah, don't do like us and forget that part. Oh, that's not too bad. And take note, on ours at least, that little cover does not set flush. All right, battery's ready to go back in now. It's got some rails in there that you got to work it into, so just take your time. Okay. So it had to be twisted just a little bit, rotated to get it to line up what the brackets look like. And now we reinstall these brackets to hold the battery in place. And while he's working on that, I'm going to go ahead and start on the front. You just need to remove these 2 bolts. Side, you come around to this the right side here and loosen up this axle nut, or axle bolt I should say. On this side, once you have the bolt out on the right side, this side just slides out. And spacers, keep track of everything that comes out. And I would advise you to leave this cover off until you test and make sure everything works on the bike. Listen for anything that sounds bad and be ready to pull this cable out before you start this process wherever you take it. Remember, when you disconnect the battery, you have to have this thing to turn it back on and marry it to the motorcycle. All right, turn it on. Putting it in drive, fairly good. And giving it a little throttle. Look at that. A little bit of noise you hear is not uncommon. It's just where the brake pads are touching the brake disc. You still got a little bit of a hop from potentially being out of balance. Now we didn't balance this wheel because there's no real way to balance it. The shaft in the middle does not come out. The cable stays attached, but it weighs so much that a few grams here or there on the tire is probably not going to make much of a difference. But the spokes could still be out of true. I can still feel a little bit of vibration at a certain speed here as it accelerates, but it looks a lot better and feels a lot better than it did on the stock tires. Thanks again to Wheeler's Performance Motorcycle Shop in Robbinsville, North Carolina. At Tell the Dragon, hit these guys up for anything that you need when you're in the area visiting or otherwise. They can hook you up. They got good deals on tires and parts and always take care of people. Good folks. Thanks, y'all.